Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tales, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The rain began softly that evening, the kind that doesn't announce itself with thunder, only a hush that spreads through the air like a secret. From the window of a small apartment on the fourth floor, the city looked gentler, its edges blurred by mist, the streetlights haloed in gold. I had just placed a kettle on the stove, the faint hum of boiling water mixing with the patter outside. It smelled like wet pavement and green leaves, the kind of scent that makes you feel nostalgic for something you haven't lived yet. Wasn't expecting that night to mean anything special. It was just another evening, another cup of tea waiting for the storm to pass. But sometimes life finds its way through the smallest cracks, a pause in the rain, a stranger's glance, a word left hanging in the air. That's how love begins, not with fireworks, but with silence filled by the sound of rain. The tea leaves swirled in the pot as I watched droplets race down the glass. The city below was full of people hurrying home under umbrellas, heads lowered, shoes splashing through puddles that mirrored neon lights. And yet, amid that rush, there was peace, like the world was moving without asking for attention. I remember standing by that window longer than usual, my reflection merging with the dim city glow. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was curiosity that pulled me out the door. I wanted to feel the rain on my face, to walk without purpose, to listen to how quiet the world becomes when everyone else hides from the weather. Outside, the air was cool and alive. Drops landed softly on my coat, tiny chills that woke every sense. I crossed the narrow street toward the corner cafe, the one that always smelled of roasted beans and orange peel. Its windows fogged with warmth, silhouettes moving lazily inside. That light drew me in like a small lighthouse for tired souls. But before I could reach the door, the rain changed. It thickened suddenly, each drop heavier, filling the air with silver noise. I stopped under the awning of a bookstore, half hidden behind stacks of paperbacks and postcards. People rushed by, their umbrellas blooming like dark flowers. That's when I saw her. She stood by the crosswalk, one hand clutching a small blue umbrella, the other holding her bag close. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, her shoes soaked. But she wasn't running. She was laughing quietly, almost to herself, like the rain had told her a private joke. The sight of someone smiling in such a storm, did something to me. It softened something I didn't know was hard. For a moment, our eyes met across the blur of headlights and drizzle. Just a glance, brief and uncertain. She looked away first, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and I turned back toward the cafe, pretending I hadn't noticed. But my heart had already taken a photograph of that instant. The sound of the rain grew louder, and in that music, I knew this night would stay with me. I stepped closer to the curb, the smell of wet asphalt rising up as cars passed. The pedestrian light blinked red to green, and she started to cross. The rain pushed harder, a curtain of silver between us. Without thinking, I lifted my umbrella, an old black one, slightly torn at the edge, and held it out. She hesitated, then stepped under it, our shoulders brushing. The world seemed to pause for that heartbeat. The street noise faded, replaced by the soft percussion of raindrops above us. We didn't speak at first. We just listened to the rhythm, to the silence between breaths, to the fragile moment that had somehow chosen us. "It's coming down hard," she said finally, her voice like a warm chord in the cool air. "It is," I replied. "Good thing umbrellas still bring strangers together." She smiled, and it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. We crossed the street side by side, sharing a tiny circle of dry space while the rest of the world stayed drenched. It was nothing, really two people caught in the same rain, but it felt like the beginning of something soft and unnamed. By the time we reached the cafe, our shoes were dripping, our laughter shy but real. Inside, The air was warm with cinnamon and steam. I remember thinking that maybe storms aren't meant to be feared. Maybe they're just the sky's way of making two paths meet. I didn't know her name yet. But that night, as the rain whispered against the window, I knew I would never forget the sound of her voice saying that simple line. It's coming down hard. We sat near the window, the glass still trembling softly with the rain outside. The world beyond had turned into watercolor cars, melted into reflections. People blurred into silhouettes carrying colorless umbrellas. Inside, it was warm and slow. Steam rose from 2 cups of tea, curling into shapes that vanished before they were named. The faint scent of jasmine lingered between us, light and comforting, like a shared breath. She held her cup with both hands, watching the ripples settle. It's funny, she said, how rain can make everything feel closer, even strangers. I smiled, resting my elbow on the table. Maybe that's because rain doesn't let you rush. It forces you to stop, to listen. I stirred my tea, watching the tiny whirlpool form. People don't listen much these days. She nodded, her eyes soft but distant, as if she was listening to something far away. I think that's why I like storms, she said quietly. They remind me the world is still alive, messy, unpredictable, real. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, not loud enough to scare, just enough to remind us the sky was watching. I remember thinking that her voice had the same rhythm as the rain, steady, thoughtful, never trying to fill the silence. It didn't need to dot the cafe, hummed with low music and the clink of cups. A small lamp above our table cast a golden circle that felt almost sacred. I looked at her, the way the light touched her hair, the small droplets still clinging to her sleeve. I wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too heavy, too blunt for the quiet between us dot. So instead, I asked, "Do you come here often?" It was a foolish question, the kind people ask when they want to stay a little longer. "Sometimes," she replied, "mostly when it rains. I like how the windows fog up and the street disappears. It's like being inside a story." That made me laugh softly. A rainy story. Maybe this one. She tilted her head. "You think this will be a story?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe just a small memory we keep for lonely nights." Her eyes met mine, then steady, curious, unafraid. For a heartbeat, the space between us was filled with something tender and unspoken. She smiled, a quiet surrender to the moment. "Then let's make it a good one." We talked after that, not about anything grand, just small things, the kind that only matter when they're shared. Favorite books, the smell of summer soil, the way her grandmother used to dry clothes under the porch when it rained. I told her about how I always left one window open during storms, just to hear the sound of it as I fell asleep. She said that was brave. I said it was lonely dot when she laughed. It sounded like a candle flickering in the dark. I remember every little thing, how she brushed her hair behind her ear when she thought, how she tapped her fingers lightly against the cup when the music changed. Those details stay. Even when names fade dot at some point, she asked, "Do you think people meet by chance? Or is it something else?" I thought about it, tracing the rim of my cup with a finger. Maybe both. Maybe we walk around with invisible strings, and sometimes the rain makes them visible. She looked down, smiling at her reflection in the tea. "That's a lovely thought," she said. "I'd like to believe that." Outside, the rain began to slow, softening from a downpour to a mist. The world seemed calmer now, rinsed clean. People started to reappear, shadows turning into motion again. I glanced at the window, then back at her. I didn't want the moment to end. The stillness between us felt fragile, like glass that would break if touched too roughly. "Looks like it's easing up," I said quietly. "Yeah," she whispered, tracing a finger across the condensation on the window. "I guess that means we have to leave soon." "Maybe," I said. Or maybe we wait for one more song. She smiled again, and that was enough. The rain outside became background to our silence, to the heartbeat of a connection that didn't need names yet. Just two strangers, sharing warmth while the storm softened into memory dot. And that's how it began. 2 cups of tea, a flickering lamp, and a rain that refused to let the night end too soon. When the music faded and the cafe grew quiet, we lingered as if the chairs themselves held us there. Outside, the last of the storm was whispering to the rooftop soft, almost apologetic. The rain had thinned into a mist that drifted lazily under the amber streetlights, turning every puddle into a pool of trembling gold. It felt like the night was sighing, gently closing its eyes. She pulled her scarf tighter, glancing toward the window. "It's almost beautiful when it ends," she said. "Like the sky's been crying, and now it feels lighter." I nodded, watching how the glass reflected the world both inside and out, the glow of lamps overlapping with street reflections, her silhouette blending into it all. "I think that's what rain does," I said. "It washes noise away until you can see what's left." Her eyes flickered to mine. "And what's left?" I hesitated, a smile tugging at my lips. "Maybe peace. Maybe truth. Maybe just 2 people with nowhere else to be." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You talk like a poet." "I blame the tea," I said. "It makes me sentimental." Her laughter hung in the air for a moment, before falling into the rhythm of raindrops outside. We finished our drinks in silence, not out of discomfort, but because quiet had become its own kind of language. Every sound, the creak of wood, the sigh of wind through the doorframe, felt like part of something bigger, something tender. When we finally stepped out, the air was cool and clean, scented with petrichor and night blossoms. The streets glistened as though the city had been polished, reborn. She opened her small blue umbrella again, its fabric still damp, edges trembling in the breeze. "Where do you live?" I asked as we began to walk, our steps slow on the slick pavement. "Not far," she said. "Down by the river. You?" "Up the hill," I replied. "Near the old library." "Ah," she smiled. "So you're one of those quiet readers who collect storms and stories." "Guilty," I said. "And you? You seem like someone who walks just to listen to the world." She tilted her head, pretending to think. "Maybe I do. Maybe I like how rain makes every step sound different. Like the ground is humming." The umbrella above us was too small for 2. Every few seconds, one of us would lean closer, adjusting so neither got too wet. Our shoulders brushed again and again until it felt natural, like a rhythm learned without thought. We didn't hurry. The rain had slowed time for us dot along the way. Shop windows glowed faintly, their reflections rippling in puddles. We passed a florist closing for the night, the scent of wet roses lingering in the air. Somewhere far off, a train horn called out, lonely and fading. It felt like the city was exhaling, settling into its softer heartbeat. "You know," she said, "I almost didn't go out tonight. I was supposed to stay in, make soup, read something boring. But then the rain started, and I couldn't resist." "I'm glad you didn't," I said. "Otherwise, I'd still be drinking tea alone, talking to the thunder." She smiled at that, turning her face slightly toward me. A strand of hair, still damp, clung to her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed it away. My hand lingered for just a moment, long enough to feel the warmth of her skin, the quick catch of her breath. She didn't move, just looked at me, eyes wide, soft as the moon reflected in puddles. Then she looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're kind," she said. "People don't do gentle things much anymore." I didn't know how to answer, so I said the only thing that felt true. Rain teaches you to be gentle. It falls, but it never forces. We walked the rest of the way in silence. Every few steps, our hands brushed, the air between us charged with quiet understanding. The storm had become a memory now, lingering only in our clothes, our hair, and whatever invisible thread had begun to tie us together. When we reached the corner where our paths split, she stopped. The rain had almost stopped completely, the world wrapped in that heavy, still air that follows a storm. "This is me," she said, nodding toward a small lane that led down to the river. "Thank you for sharing your umbrella. It's yours now," I said softly. "Keep it. Maybe it'll remind you of this night." She hesitated, then accepted it with both hands, smiling like she wanted to say more, but didn't know how. "Maybe next time it rains," she said. "I'll lend it back." And with that, she turned away, her figure slowly fading into the mist, the blue umbrella bobbing gently like a small, floating secret. I stood there until the last drop fell, my hands empty, my heart full of a quiet I hadn't known I'd been missing. The city was different the next morning. The streets still shimmered faintly, and the air carried that crisp scent only rain can leave behind half earth, half memory. I woke early, drawn to the window like a habit. Outside, the world seemed washed clean, the rooftops still holding drops that glinted in the soft sunlight. Somewhere below, a sparrow hopped along a wet railing, shaking off the night. I poured a cup of tea, the steam curling upward in pale ribbons. The same cafe cup from last night sat on the counter, a faint lipstick stain marking its edge. I hadn't washed it yet. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe it felt like a small relic of something that wasn't meant to vanish so quickly. I wondered if she was awake too, somewhere near the river. Remembering the same rain dot, her name had lingered on my tongue since she told it to me at the crosswalk before we said goodbye, Myra. It had sounded like water when she said it, light and fleeting. I'd replayed her laugh, her voice, the tilt of her head, as if holding on to them could keep the night from fading. The world outside had resumed its usual rhythm vendors calling, bikes rushing by, the city stretching its limbs after the storm. But to me, everything felt a little slower, like the world was giving me time to breathe between seconds. I spent the morning writing nothing in particular, just words trying to make sense of how a stranger could feel so familiar. The kind of writing that isn't meant to be shared, only understood. I found myself back at the cafe that afternoon. Maybe I was hoping to see her again, though I told myself I just wanted tea. The place looked the same warm, slow, with the faint buzz of conversation and the rain-streaked window already beginning to clear. The owner nodded in recognition as I took the same seat by the glass. I didn't even need to order. The jasmine tea arrived as if by instinct. Every time the door opened, I looked up. Every time it wasn't her, I looked back down at my cup, smiling at my own foolishness. Love, or whatever this was, makes waiting feel both beautiful and endless. Outside, puddles reflected passing clouds, and for a moment, I thought I saw a blue umbrella across the street. But it was only a trick of color, a stranger rushing by. Still, something told me it wasn't over. There are moments in life that refuse to end neatly. They echo instead, like rain tapping softly on the window, long after the storm. So I took out my notebook and began to write, a letter I never intended to send. Dear Myra, last night felt like a story borrowed from somewhere else, the kind that doesn't need an ending to be remembered. I don't know what it was, the sound of rain, the warmth of tea, or the way you looked at the world like it had secrets, but it felt like home for a while. If we never meet again, I hope the next storm finds you smiling, still unafraid of getting wet. I paused, the pen trembling slightly in my hand. The words looked too small on paper for what I felt, but they were enough. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it between the pages of my notebook, pressing it closed as if to keep it alive. The bell over the cafe door chimed softly then, and a gust of cool air followed. I didn't look up right away. I was lost in the smell of tea and paper, in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. But then I heard a familiar voice asking for jasmine tea, light and unsure. When I raised my eyes, she was there. No blue umbrella this time, just her hair dry, cheeks touched by the pale light of day. She looked around, her gaze brushing over the room until it landed on me. For a second, we both froze, the whole world suspended between recognition and disbelief. You came back, I said softly. She smiled, the same quiet smile that had stayed with me through the morning rain. I owed you an umbrella, she said, holding it up folded neatly, still glistening at the edges. We both laughed then, the sound small but real, like the first drops of a new rain. We sat down again by the same window. Outside, clouds were gathering, pale gray against the fading sun. The city seemed to know what we didn't yet dare to say, that sometimes the rain doesn't end things. Sometimes it simply begins them again. The rain returned that evening, almost as if it had been waiting for us. It began with a hush that slipped quietly through the air, soft as breath on glass. The first drops landed against the cafe window, tracing uncertain paths down the pane. I remember the way she looked at it, like greeting an old friend. It came back, she whispered, smiling faintly. Just like you said it would. We were seated in the same corner, the small lamp glowing between us. Outside, the world melted again into reflections. The streets glimmered, the lights blurred, and everything beyond the glass felt like a dream dissolving slowly into night. The scent of jasmine tea mixed with rain and the faint sweetness of her perfume. Time seemed to pause, stretched thin and golden. We talked more easily now, no longer strangers, but still soft with careful curiosity. She told me she was a photographer, that she liked to wander the city during storms because rain made everything honest. People stop pretending when it rains, she said. They just try to get home, and in that hurry, their faces tell the truth. I told her I was a writer who couldn't seem to finish anything. Maybe you're waiting for the right story, she said, tilting her head. Something that feels true enough to stay. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I'm just afraid of endings. She looked at me then, eyes warm and steady. Not all stories need to end, she said. Some just become quiet, and that's enough. The rain deepened outside, a steady rhythm, tapping at the glass. I noticed how her hands cupped the mug like a small source of warmth. The light turned her hair into soft gold, her skin glowing against the shadows. Every moment felt tender, deliberate, as if the night itself was listening. Do you ever think about the first time you notice someone? I asked suddenly, that exact second when the world shifts and they stop being part of the crowd. She smiled, thoughtful. Yes, I think that's when we start remembering them, before we even know their name. Maybe that's how love begins. Her words settled between us like a blanket. Outside, a car passed, its headlights spilling across wet asphalt in long streaks of silver. The sound of rain against the roof deepened, turning from background noise to heartbeat. I wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to say that maybe the story I had been waiting to write had already found me. But instead, I just said, "It's beautiful, isn't it? The way rain makes everything softer." "It is," she said, her voice barely above the hum of the storm. "It's like forgiveness falling from the sky." We didn't speak much after that. Words would have felt clumsy. Instead, we sat and listened to the rain, to the small clinks of cups, to the way the cafe breathed around us. There are moments you live that already feel like memories being written, as if time is folding them gently for you to keep. When it grew late, she stood, wrapping her scarf around her neck. I followed her to the door, reluctant to let the night close. "You'll get wet," I said, watching the rain streaking the doorway. She opened the blue umbrella, smiling. "Then you'll just have to walk me again." And so we stepped out, side by side, under the same shared shelter. The rain welcomed us, its cool touch familiar and kind. The city was quiet, now just the sound of our footsteps and the faint rustle of leaves. We didn't hurry. There was no reason to. The world had slowed to our pace dot at the crosswalk. We paused, just as before. The air smelled of rain and streetlights, the same melody that had started everything. Déjà vu, she said softly. Maybe it's just the universe giving us another chance. I replied. She turned to look at me, and there, in the silver glow of wet pavement, she leaned in. Her lips brushed mine, gentle and fleeting, like a raindrop that hesitates before falling. It wasn't urgent, not loud or desperate. It was the kind of kiss that belongs to quiet hearts. A promise, not a question. When we pulled back, the rain continued its patient song, indifferent to the small miracle beneath it. We stood there for a long while, not needing anything more. Years later, I still think of that night whenever it rains. Not as a beginning or an ending, but as a reminder that love doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers, steady and kind, choosing to bloom in the calm after a storm dot. And if you listen closely, even now, you can still hear it. The soft rhythm of rain on glass, the echo of laughter under an umbrella, and the quiet certainty that some stories never truly end. They just keep raining softly. Somewhere inside you, the days that followed were gentler somehow, as if the storm had rearranged something inside me. Even the air seemed easier to breathe. I woke up each morning with the faint scent of rain still lingering on my coat. And every evening I found myself walking to that same cafe, half hoping, half pretending I wasn't waiting for her dot. Sometimes she came, sometimes she didn't. But each time the rain returned, so did she. We never planned our meetings, they simply happened, like the weather itself. Some evenings we talked until the cafe closed, our words meandering through small, tender topics. The books that shaped us, the places we wanted to see, the things we were still too afraid to want. Other nights, we hardly spoke at all. We just watched the rain slide down the windows. The silence between us filled with something, softer than speech dot. It's strange how easily the world can shrink to a single table, 2 cups, and the hush of falling water dot one night. She told me about her father, how he used to hum old songs when it rained, how he'd dance with her mother in the kitchen when thunder rolled outside. Her voice wavered only slightly when she said, "He died on a rainy day. That's why I never learned to hate storms." I didn't say anything at first. I just reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. Her skin was cool, like porcelain warmed by touch. She smiled faintly, a smile that carried both loss and gratitude. "I think," she said, "that's when I began to believe rain isn't sadness. It's remembrance." Those words stayed with me long after. Every drop that touched the window afterward felt like a small act of memory. Sometimes we walked home together after the cafe closed. The streets would be nearly empty, and the sound of our shoes against the wet ground became its own rhythm. She would hold the umbrella, and I would carry the teacups we never finished. Once, near the river, she stopped to take a photo, the reflections of streetlights rippling like tiny galaxies. "I want to remember this light," she said. "It feels honest." I didn't know what to say, so I said the simplest thing, "You're beautiful when you look at the world that way." She lowered her camera then, meeting my eyes. Maybe the world looks beautiful because someone is watching it with me. The rain kept falling softly around us, filling the pauses we didn't know how to fill ourselves. I wanted to tell her everything that her presence had begun to color my quiet life, that her laughter had found the corners of my solitude and made them glow. But love, when it is real, doesn't rush to declare itself. It breathes quietly, waiting for its own right moment. Not another week passed. Another storm came. We sat by the same window as always, but something in the air had changed. She was quieter that night, her eyes tracing the droplets on the glass. "I might leave soon," she said softly. "There's a gallery in another city that wants my work. Just for a few months." I looked down at my cup, watching the faint ripples from my trembling hand. "That's wonderful," I said, though my chest felt heavy. "You should go." She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I don't want to forget this. Any of it." "You won't," I said. "Some things don't fade. They just turn into weather inside you." She laughed quietly at that, the kind of laugh that hides a tear. "Then maybe I'll carry you in the next storm." The rain outside had softened again, as if listening. I wanted to tell her to stay, but instead I said, "Promise me you'll write. Even just one line." "I will," she whispered. "Every time it rains." We didn't say goodbye that night. We just stood under the umbrella once more, silent, letting the rain bless our quiet ache. When we reached the corner where we had first met, she stopped and looked at me for a long time. Then she kissed my cheek light, trembling, endless in its stillness, and walked away with the blue umbrella glowing faintly under the lamplight. I stood there until she disappeared, the sound of her footsteps dissolving into rain. The city blurred again, and the same cafe window reflected both our memories, still warm, still alive, still raining softly inside me. The weeks after she left stretched long and quiet, like the space between raindrops before a storm. The city moved on, as cities always do, its rhythm unchanged, its lights still blooming each night over the wet streets. But for me, everything had a faint echo. The rain didn't sound the same without her beside me. Even the smell of jasmine tea felt lonelier. I kept writing to her, though I never knew where to send the letters. Each began the same way. "Dear Myra, it rained again today." Then I would tell her about the small things. How the cafe now played different music. How the river swelled after 3 days of steady drizzle. How the same sparrow still came to rest on the railing outside my window. I never asked if she was happy. I just hoped she was. Sometimes I imagined her in another city, walking under unfamiliar rain, camera in hand, catching the reflections of strangers who didn't know how lucky they were to be seen by her. Maybe she still thought of me when thunder rolled. Maybe she had folded our story neatly away, the way one keeps a letter never meant to be mailed. The seasons turned slowly. The warmth of summer softened into autumn, and the rains became quieter, more hesitant. I began to notice the way light changed through the cafe window, softer in the mornings, golden in the evenings. Life continued its steady rhythm, work, writing, silence. Yet, beneath it all, she lingered like an aftertaste, subtle but impossible to forget. One afternoon, as I was leaving the cafe, the barista stopped me. "Someone left this for you," she said, handing me a small envelope, slightly bent at the corner. My name was written in familiar handwriting, soft, looping letters that seemed to tremble on the paper dot. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a rainy street I didn't recognize. The pavement shimmered, and in the corner of the frame stood a person holding a blue umbrella. On the back, in her handwriting, was one line: "Every storm reminds me of you." I don't remember walking home that day. The world around me was a blur of sound and color, but inside, I felt something quiet bloom. Not sadness exactly, but the gentle ache of being remembered. That night, I placed the photo by my window and made a pot of jasmine tea. The steam rose softly, catching the light like tiny ghosts of the past. I opened my notebook and began to write again. This time, not a letter, but a story. About rain and love, and two people who met by accident and never truly parted, even when distance grew between them. Writing it felt like breathing after holding my breath too long. Each word came slow and steady, like rain beginning to fall again after months of drought. I didn't write to capture her. I knew better than that. I wrote to understand what she had given me, a way to listen to the world with softer ears, to notice the quiet moments between storms. When I finished, the rain had returned outside. The sound of it against the window wrapped around me like a song half remembered. I turned off the lights and let the room glow only from the street lamp outside. The photograph on the windowsill shimmered faintly, the blue umbrella almost alive in the reflection. I whispered her name once, just to hear how it still fit in my mouth. Mira. It sounded like rain. It sounded like goodbye, but it didn't hurt Dot instead. I felt a calm settle over me, deep and tender. Some people arrive in our lives, storms, sudden, full of thunder and light, and others, like Mira, come as rain, steady, cleansing, leaving the world softer than they found it. Outside, the rain kept falling, slow and rhythmic, as if reading aloud the words I had written. I closed my eyes and listened, until all that was left was the sound of the storm, and the warmth of knowing that love, once real, never truly leaves. It just changes form, into stories, into rain, into quiet. And in that stillness, I finally slept that winter, arrived quietly that year. The rain grew colder, turning to mist that wrapped itself around the edges of the city. Trees stood bare, their branches tracing dark lines against the gray sky. I had grown used to the solitude again, though it wasn't the same kind I'd known before Myra. It was softer now, less like loneliness, more like peace. Some nights, when the wind whispered through the cracks of my window, I imagined it carried pieces of her laughter, faint, weightless, but still warm. The cafe had changed, too. They replaced the old lamp with a brighter one, painted the walls a deeper shade of green. Yet every time I walked in, I could still feel her presence in the air. The echo of her voice, the ghost of her smile reflected in the fogged glass. I often sat by the same window, watching rain slide down the pane, tracing invisible maps of memory. The barista no longer asked what I wanted. He just brought jasmine tea, wordlessly placing it beside the small notebook I always carried. One evening, after days without rain, the sky finally broke open again. It began slowly, a few scattered drops that turned the street dark and alive. The sound of it filled the cafe, familiar and comforting. I looked outside and thought of her again, not with longing, but with gratitude. The rain was how she spoke to me now. I reached into my coat pocket for the photograph she had sent. The edges were soft from being held too often. The ink slightly smudged where my thumb always rested. I turned it over, reading her handwriting again. Every storm reminds me of you. I smiled. The words no longer felt like a wound, they were a gift. Proof that for a brief moment, under a sky full of rain, two lives had touched. And that touch had stayed Dot as I sat there. I realized something simple yet profound. Love doesn't always ask to be kept. Sometimes it just wants to be remembered. And remembering is a form of keeping too. The rain thickened and the cafe's lights shimmered through the glass. I opened my notebook, not to write to her, but to write because of her. Words came easily now, gentle, certain, like drops finding their way home. I wrote about the color of her umbrella, the shape of her laughter, the way she'd said that rain was the world's way of healing itself. I wrote until the tea cooled beside me, and the street outside turned to silver dot at some point. I felt a presence near the door. I looked up out of habit, expecting only another stranger seeking shelter. But instead, I saw a familiar figure framed by the rain. She stood there, coat damp, hair clinging to her cheeks, that same small blue umbrella folded in her hand. For a heartbeat, I thought the storm was playing tricks on me. But then she smiled soft, hesitant, as if unsure whether she was still part of this story. Mira, I whispered, the name slipping out like breath. She stepped closer, water dripping onto the floor, her eyes shimmering in the warm light. "I told you," she said, voice trembling with fright. "I always come back when it rains." For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain sang its steady lullaby around us, a curtain of silver between the past and the now. Then she crossed the small space between us, sat down by the window, and exhaled. "I thought you'd be gone," she said quietly. "People don't usually wait this long." "I wasn't waiting," I said, smiling faintly. "I was just listening." Her laughter was softer than I remembered, but still carried that same rhythm of falling rain. "Do you still write?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "Mostly about storms." "Then write this one too," she whispered, looking out the window. "So it never ends." And so we sat there, two souls framed again by rain, the world outside glowing like memory reborn. No declarations, no promises. Just tea cooling between us, the quiet comfort of being found again, and the sound of 1,000 tiny drops stitching time back together. I realized then that maybe love isn't about holding on or letting go. Maybe it's about meeting again and again in different rains, different seasons, and recognizing that the same heartbeat still echoes beneath it all. Outside, the storm deepened. Inside, it felt like home. That night, the rain didn't stop. It stayed with the city until morning, lingering like a lullaby that refused to end. From the cafe window, the street below shimmered beneath layers of silver light. Cars moved slowly, their reflections gliding like ghostly fish through puddles. The world was half awake, half dreaming. Inside, everything felt suspended in that gentle, watery hush. The sound of dripping eaves, the quiet clink of ceramic cups, the low hum of two hearts relearning how to breathe in the same rhythm again. Mira sat across from me, her hands cupped around her tea as if to hold the warmth of the room. Her hair was damp, curling slightly at the ends, and the sleeves of her coat were still dark with rain. I wanted to tell her how strange it felt, seeing her again, like watching a dream step quietly into daylight, but the words refused to form. Maybe silence was enough. Maybe the rain was already saying everything for us, Dot. She looked up, catching my gaze, and smiled. "You still look the same," she said. "Still the kind of person who watches storms, instead of waiting for them to pass." I laughed softly. "And you still look like someone who walks straight into them." Her eyes glowed, playful and warm. "Maybe that's why we met. I walk into storms, and you wait inside them." The moment felt fragile, almost sacred. There are times when the past feels too close, and yet, somehow, it doesn't hurt. That's how it was with her. All the ache, all the longing had settled into something calmer, a river that had found its bed after years of wandering. "Did you miss me?" she asked suddenly, voice barely louder than the rain. I looked at her for a long moment. "Every time it rained," I said. But it wasn't a sad kind of missing. It was like listening for an echo I knew would return. She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I missed you too. I thought of you every time the city blurred into color, every time the sky forgot how to stop crying." We both laughed then, softly, carefully, as though laughter itself might break the spell. Outside, the rain continued its quiet applause against the glass. The air smelled of tea and memory, of the faint sweetness that comes after forgiveness. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small envelope, weathered and soft at the edges. I found it when I unpacked after the gallery closed. I wasn't sure if I should send it. Inside was a single photograph. It was of the cafe window, taken from outside during a storm. The frame captured the glow of the lamp, 2 cups of tea, and a faint reflection. My face half hidden behind the glass, hers turned slightly toward the rain. "It's from that night," she said. The first one. I ran my thumb gently over the surface, tracing the rain streaks frozen in the image. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It's home," she said. For a while, we didn't speak. The cafe around us began to empty. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed one by one. The rain softened again, slower now, patient. I wanted to ask her if she was staying this time, if this was a new beginning or just another passing storm. But she looked so peaceful sitting there, I couldn't bring myself to break it with questions. Instead, I said, "You know, every time I write about the rain, I write about you." Myra smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep understanding. "Then promise me something," she said. "Anything. Keep writing," she whispered. "Even when it doesn't rain. Especially then." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, despite the chill in the air, her touch steady and real. Outside, a single drop of water rolled down the window, slow and deliberate, like time itself remembering how to move again. "I think," she said softly, "we met so the rain could teach us both something." "What's that?" "That love doesn't end. It just changes weather." The rain outside grew fainter, each drop falling with the weight of a memory, gently set down. We sat there until the sky began to pale, until morning crept slowly across the wet streets. And when she finally stood to leave, the world felt lighter again, washed clean, like the beginning of another story, waiting quietly under the cloud's dot as she stepped outside. She turned once more, lifting the blue umbrella with that same quiet grace. "Until the next storm," she said, her voice carrying softly through the drizzle. And I, still sitting by the window, whispered back to no one and to everything. Until the next storm. The next storm took weeks to come. In those in-between days, the sky stayed dry, and life moved as it always does, quietly, stubbornly forward. I worked, wrote, cooked, watched the light change across the walls. But every evening, when the wind stirred or the air grew heavy with the promise of rain, I found myself glancing at the window, half expecting the tap of drops, half expecting her. Sometimes I read the letters I'd never sent. They had become their own kind of diary, not about her absence, but about what she had left behind in me. A gentleness, a willingness to see beauty in small things, a patience I hadn't known I possessed. Love, it seemed, wasn't only about presence. It was also about what remained after the sound of footsteps faded. The city began to change again, slipping slowly toward spring. Buds appeared on the trees by the river, tiny promises of green. The air grew warmer, the nights longer. I'd started bringing my notebook outside, writing by the dim glow of the street lamps. The world was full of stories I hadn't noticed before. Couples whispering under awnings, children chasing puddles, an old man feeding pigeons as if time itself were waiting politely beside him. Every scene carried a trace of her, not in the way of longing, but as a soft echo, a note still humming somewhere in the air dock. And one evening, the wind shifted. The smell of rain returned, that unmistakable mix of metal and soil, like a memory you can taste. I didn't hurry this time. I simply lit a small lamp by the window, poured tea, and opened the cafe photograph she'd given me. Outside, the first drops began to fall, tapping the sill in a rhythm I knew by heart. A knock came soon after, light, hesitant. When I opened the door, she was standing there, rain in her hair, the blue umbrella drooping at her side. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me with that familiar, quiet smile that always seemed to come from somewhere beyond words. "I was walking," she said finally, and then it started raining. I didn't even think. My feet just brought me here. I stepped aside, and she entered, shaking droplets from her coat. The room filled with the scent of wet air and jasmine. It felt natural, effortless, as if no time had passed at all. She set the umbrella by the door, where it leaned like an old companion finally home. We sat by the window again, but now it was my apartment, not the cafe. The lamplight flickered softly, painting gold over the raindrops. I poured tea into 2 cups without asking. She laughed quietly. You remembered? I never forgot, I said. We talked as the rain deepened, about her gallery, the places she'd seen, the skies she'd chased. She spoke of rivers and old train stations, of strangers who smiled at her lens. I told her about the stories I'd written, how every one of them had a little rain in it and a little of her. Somewhere between sentences, our hands found each other on the table, as naturally as breathing. Outside, the thunder murmured like an old friend. Inside, everything felt both new and familiar. I realized then that what had bound us wasn't the rain itself, but the way we had learned to be still within it, to listen, to see, to stay open to whatever the sky decided to give. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Do you ever think, she said softly, that the rain remembers us? Maybe, I whispered. Maybe it's the only thing that does. We watched in silence as the storm wrapped the world in silver. The city lights blurred, the air shimmered, and somewhere a church bell rang, muffled by water. She turned her face toward me, eyes half closed. If the rain keeps coming, she murmured, promise me we'll keep meeting it. Wherever we are. I promise, I said. We sat there until the kettle grew cold and the night grew thick, until the sky softened into that pale gray just before dawn. When the rain finally began to fade, she whispered, listen, it's slowing down. Yes, I said, but it never really ends. It just rests. She smiled, her voice barely a breath. Then so will we. And for the first time, I understood. Love, when it's gentle, doesn't need thunder to announce itself. It lives quietly in the sound of water, in the warmth of shared silence, in the knowing that some people aren't meant to stay or leave. They're meant to return, like rain, outside. The last drops fell against the glass, slow and deliberate, as if signing the final line of a long, tender story. Inside, we stayed by the window, hands entwined, watching the sky breathe again. The city gleamed, washed clean once more doubt by morning. The storm had passed. The city awoke under a soft veil of mist, every rooftop beating with dew. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the world itself needed time to stretch after such a long rain. Inside my apartment, the air still smelled faintly of jasmine and wet wool. Mira was asleep on the couch, her hair fanned out like a dark halo, her breathing slow and even. The blue umbrella rested near the door, still glistening slightly, a small monument to everything that had led us here. I stood by the window, holding my cup of tea, watching sunlight crawl gently across the floorboards. It felt almost unreal that after all the storms, all the waiting, all the unspoken words, she was here. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as something alive and ordinary. Love, I realized, isn't always a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a quiet morning, shared between 2 people who have finally stopped running from the rain. When she stirred, the light touched her face. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused for a moment, before they found me. She smiled, that small, sleepy smile that had always undone me. You're awake early, she murmured. I didn't want to miss the morning, I said. It feels like the world is holding its breath. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. You always notice things like that, she said softly. That's what I missed the most. I sat beside her, the wooden floor cool beneath us. I used to think waiting for you was the hardest part, I admitted. But it wasn't. The hardest part was learning to stay open, to believe the rain might bring you back one day. Her hand found mine beneath the blanket. And did it? I looked at her. It always does. For a while, we just listened to the quiet hum of the world waking, to the soft patter of drops still slipping from the eaves. I could hear the faint laughter of children down the street, the distant roll of a cart on cobblestones. Everything was ordinary again, and yet it all shimmered with a kind of quiet magic. I should go, she said eventually, though her voice carried no urgency. The gallery opens next week. There's so much to prepare. I nodded. The ache in my chest was gentle this time, like a tide instead of a storm. Then promise me you'll send photos, I said. Of the new city, the new rains. She smiled. Only if you promise to keep writing. We stood at the door together, where the light spilled across the threshold. She unfolded the umbrella, even though the sky was clearing. Old habits, she said, laughing softly. It suits you, I said. You always look like you belong in the rain. She hesitated before stepping out, then turned back. If we meet again, where do you think it'll be? I thought for a moment. Anywhere the sky decides to cry. Her laughter lingered as she stepped into the street. The umbrella caught the sunlight, glowing faintly blue against the morning mist. I watched until she disappeared around the corner. Swallowed by the brightness of the day, got back inside. The silence felt different. Not empty, but whole. I returned to my desk, opened my notebook, and began to write again. Not letters this time, not stories of longing or loss. Just small pieces of what it means to be human, to wait, to forgive, to begin again. I wrote about the storm that had brought her to me, and the calm that had taught me to let her go. About how love isn't about keeping someone forever, but recognizing them in every season of your life, in the sunlight, in the stillness, in the rain. When I looked up again, the last drops were sliding from the window, leaving clear glass behind. The city gleamed below, washed clean, ready for whatever came next. I smiled, closed the notebook, and whispered to the quiet room, not a prayer, not a goodbye, but a thank dash you dot, because some people come into your life like rain. They don't stay, but they leave everything softer. And as I sat there, the kettle began to hum again, steady and familiar. Outside, a single cloud drifted lazily across the sky, promising, perhaps, another storm someday. And I knew, when it came, I'd be ready to listen. Spring unfolded quietly, and the rains returned in gentler moods. They came as soft showers in the mornings, brief silver veils that disappeared before noon, leaving the streets glistening and alive. The city, once gray and heavy, now bloomed again. Windowsill flowers opened to the drizzle. The scent of wet soil drifted through narrow alleys, and every puddle mirrored fragments of sky. I found myself walking more often, sometimes to the river, sometimes nowhere in particular, just following the rhythm of water on stone, the whisper of wind against leaves. The world had become a vast, breathing reminder that life goes on, that love doesn't vanish when it leaves the room. It lingers quietly, reshaping itself into light, into patience, into gratitude. I didn't see Mira for a long time after that morning. She had gone again, as she always did, moving with the season like a cloud that knows where it's needed next. But somehow, her absence didn't ache anymore. It glowed, a steady, tender warmth that filled the spaces where longing used to live. Her photograph still sat by my window. 2 cups, a lamp, the shimmer of rain between us. Every time I dusted it, I caught myself smiling. It no longer felt like a memory frozen in glass. It felt like a doorway, something I could step through whenever I missed her voice. I kept writing. Some nights, the stories came easily. Quiet tales of strangers who met by accident and changed each other's weather. Other nights, the words moved slower, like raindrops crawling down glass. But I didn't rush them. I'd learned that beauty has its own pace, and the heart writes best when it isn't trying to finish something. One evening, while I was closing my notebook, the phone buzzed softly beside me. A message, short, simple, familiar. It rained today. Thought of you. No signature, but she didn't need one. My chest tightened, not with sadness, but with recognition, the way an old song feels when it plays unexpectedly on the radio. I replied only with, "Then we're under the same sky again." Outside, the clouds had gathered thick and gray. A single flash of lightning blinked at the horizon, followed by that long, low roll of thunder that sounds like the earth remembering something. I opened the window and let the first drops fall onto my hands. It felt like home. The rain deepened, wrapping the city in its hush. Somewhere below, someone was laughing under an umbrella, footsteps echoing in rhythm with the storm. The streetlights flickered to life, turning puddles into golden constellations. And there, among all of it, I felt her again. Not in body, not in sight, but in that invisible thread that runs through sound and memory. I whispered into the rain, "You kept your promise." A gust of wind answered, rattling the window gently. As if in agreement, the night went on like that, calm, unhurried. The storm outside, the warmth inside. I thought of how many times the rain had carried us back to each other, and how, even if it never happened again, that was enough. We had met where most people rush past, in stillness, in chance, in the soft space between one heartbeat and the next. When the storm finally began to fade, I closed my notebook and watched the last drops gather on the glass. The city shimmered under their weight, tender and new. Maybe this was what love becomes when it grows quiet. Not a fire, but a rhythm. Something that comes and goes, yet always returns. Before turning off the light, I whispered one last time into the dim room, "Good night, Myra, wherever you are. May the rain be kind." And as the thunder softened into silence, I felt her answer, not in words, but in the gentle pulse of water against the window. Steady and forgiving, the rain had found me again, and with it, the peace of knowing that some hearts never really part. They just keep meeting in the sound of falling rain. The months that followed drifted by like clouds, slow, quiet, and full of light. Summer arrived, but even the heat carried the smell of distant rain, that faint sweetness of things waiting to fall. The cafe reopened its windows, the city filled with sound again, bicycles rattling over cobblestones, street musicians playing under awnings, the laughter of strangers carried by the wind. And still, I kept writing. The stories had changed now. They weren't about loss anymore, or longing, or even love in the way I once understood it. They were about the small, sacred act of noticing, the way sunlight bends on a cup of tea, how a stranger's kindness feels like a raindrop landing softly on the skin. I no longer chased meaning through storms. I had learned to find it in calm. One afternoon, as I was walking by the river, I saw a group of children playing with paper boats. The sky was heavy with gray, but they didn't care. Their laughter was louder than the thunder above. I stopped to watch as the first drops fell, the boats spinning in circles before surrendering to the current. A memory stirred, Myra's voice saying, "Rain doesn't ruin things. It reveals them." The thought made me smile. I pulled out my phone without thinking and opened our last message thread. "It rained today. Thought of you." It had been weeks since that night. I started typing. "It's raining again here too." But then I stopped. Some things are better left unsent. Some connections don't need words to keep breathing. I closed my eyes and listened instead, letting the rhythm of the storm say what I couldn't. When I got home that evening, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and warm dust. The apartment felt different, lived in, peaceful, like a place finally belonging to its silence. I brewed tea, turned on the lamp, and watched the golden light spill across the room. The rain outside fell steady and sure, each drop finding its place, no longer a symbol of what I'd lost, but of what remained. On the windowsill, the photograph caught a flicker of light. 2 cups of tea, one forever empty, the other half full. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger. We made it, I whispered. Through the weather, through the waiting. That night, I began a new story. It started simply. They met in the rain. But this time, I didn't write about the beginning or the ending. I wrote about the middle, the quiet heart of things, the part where love learns to live in everyday moments. The part where someone leaves but doesn't vanish, where the world keeps raining softly, even when the umbrella closes dark. As I wrote, the rain grew heavier, drumming gently on the glass. The city dimmed, the world slowed, my thoughts wandered, and for the first time, I felt no need to hold them still. Maybe this was what she had meant, that rain doesn't belong to one moment, one story, one pair of hands. It belongs to everyone who's ever paused to listen. The thunder rolled low, far away, and I thought of her, not as someone who left, but as someone who had taught me to see. Before I turned in for the night, I opened the window wide. Cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked leaves. Somewhere, the river murmured softly in the dark. I took a deep breath, feeling it fill every quiet corner inside me. Maybe she was out there too, somewhere under the same cloud, her camera raised, the blue umbrella resting by her side. Maybe she was looking at the sky at this very moment, whispering the same thank you I just had. And if she was, then that was enough, because love, I'd come to understand, doesn't always need to return to be real. It just needs to echo, softly, endlessly, like rain against a familiar window. The air changed again as autumn crept in. The days shortened, the sky turned the color of old film, and the rain came less often, but fell deeper, slower, like it was thinking. The leaves along the riverbank began to rust and fall, gathering in soft carpets that glowed beneath the street lamps at night. I liked walking there after dark, when the city was half asleep and the world felt just small enough to hold. I carried a small notebook wherever I went, writing fragments instead of full stories. Pieces of dialogue overheard at cafés, the rhythm of footsteps on wet stone, the way lamplight glimmered in puddles like gold trapped in water. Mira was still there in every line, though not as a memory that hurt, more like a quiet current beneath the words, something that kept them alive. That it had been nearly a year since that first rain. I didn't count the days anymore. The ache of waiting had dissolved into something softer, a calm understanding that love, once shared, doesn't fade. It just moves to a different room inside you. Sometimes I wondered if she thought of me when the sky darkened where she lived. Sometimes I knew she did, without needing proof. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the drizzle return, a small package arrived, no return address, no name, just my handwriting on the label, written in her careful loops. Inside was a photograph dot. It showed a bridge at night, drenched in rain. Streetlights shimmered like stars across the wet pavement, and in the corner of the frame, faint but unmistakable, was a silhouette holding a blue umbrella. On the back, written in ink that had bled slightly from moisture, were 4 words: still raining, still us. I pressed the photo to my chest, feeling the slow, steady beat beneath my palm. It wasn't longing anymore. It was gratitude. We had both kept our promise to meet the rain wherever it found us. The next morning, the sky was clear, the kind of clear that only comes after a long storm. I walked to the café, our café, just as it opened. The same bell chimed over the door. The same warmth filled the air. I ordered 2 teas without thinking. The barista smiled, but didn't question it. Maybe he'd learned to recognize the shape of memory. when it ordered something for two. I sat by the window again, watching sunlight spill across the street. The seat across from me stayed empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. Some presences don't need bodies to exist. They linger in habits, in the rhythm of rain remembered by the soul dot. As I drank, I took out my notebook and began to write a letter I would never send. Dear Myra, the world has changed, but the rain still sounds the same. I think that's what keeps me writing, knowing that somewhere the sky is connecting us drop by drop. I don't need to find you anymore. You're already here, in the stories, in the stillness, in the way I look at the light before it fades. If you ever find this letter, maybe years from now, I hope you smile. I hope you remember how softly it fell that night, the first rain that taught us how to begin. I folded the page and tucked it between the worn covers of my notebook. Outside, the wind shifted, and the scent of rain, faint but familiar, brushed against the glass. For a moment, I could almost see her reflection there. Half light, half water, the blue umbrella tilted just so. She wasn't gone. She never had been. She was simply part of the weather now, something that moved freely, beautifully impossible to hold, but always returning. I whispered her name once more, letting it dissolve into air. Mira. And the rain answered, gentle as a sigh against the window, promising, without words, that it would come again. The final rain of the year arrived without thunder, without warning. It came quietly, as if the sky itself had remembered an old promise. The first drops fell while I was writing, tapping lightly against the glass, soft enough to blend with the sound of my pen moving across paper. When I looked up, the world outside was already shimmering, rooftops glistening, streets darkening, puddles blooming like small mirrors catching the light. I smiled. I didn't need to check my phone or the mailbox. I already knew. Wherever she was, Mira was standing somewhere beneath the same cloud. It had been a long year of gentle changes. My stories had found readers, and one of them, a quiet collection called Rain on Our First Date, had just been accepted by a small publisher. I had written it not as a confession, but as a gift. To her, to the rain, to the silence that had taught me more than any storm ever could. As I sat there watching the drizzle deepen, I realized how differently I had come to understand time. It no longer felt like something that moved away from me, but something that circled back, like seasons, like rainfall, like the way certain names always find their echo. I poured myself a cup of tea, the same blend she loved, and opened the window. Cool air drifted in, carrying that scent I knew by heart, the breath of wet leaves, earth, and faraway thunder. The city below shimmered beneath the streetlights, the same city where everything had begun. The blue umbrella was still by the door, its handle smooth from years of use. I took it gently and stepped outside. The rain welcomed me like an old friend. It soaked through my coat, kissed my hair, found its rhythm on the pavement. I walked, without hurry, tracing the familiar streets, the bookstore awning where I had first seen her, the cafe window where she had smiled, the crosswalk where two paths had merged for the first time. Everything was still there, yet changed, softened by the years and the water. When I reached the river, I stopped. The surface rippled under the rain, endless circles meeting, overlapping, vanishing. I thought about all the times we had walked. There together, about her camera flashing softly under her umbrella, about the quiet way she used to say, "The rain is just the sky trying to feel again." I took the photograph she had sent, still raining, still us. From my coat pocket, the ink had faded a little, but the image was still clear, two shadows beneath a blur of water and light. I placed it on the stone railing, where it caught a few stray drops and began to glisten again. "Thank you," I whispered, "for teaching me how to listen." The rain answered in its language of soft percussion, steady and kind. I closed the umbrella and let myself get soaked, head tilted back toward the clouds. It felt like a benediction, the sky tracing its fingers through my hair, the earth breathing beneath my feet. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think of loss or reunion, only connection, only the infinite tenderness of everything being part of everything else. After a while, I turned back toward home. The streets were empty now, the city pulsing with quiet life beneath the storm. As I walked, the lamplight followed in ripples, gold meeting gray. I thought of Mira, not as someone far away, but as something carried with me, in scent, in memory, in rhythm. When I reached my door, I left the umbrella leaning by the window and poured another cup of tea. The room was warm, alive with the hum of rain outside. I sat down at my desk and began to write the final page of my story. They met in the rain, and even when the world grew quiet, the rain never stopped. It only changed shape. Sometimes it became letters. Sometimes it became light. Sometimes it became the sound of a name whispered softly into the dark. I set the pen down, closed the notebook, and listened. The rain was slowing now, falling in longer, gentler intervals. The air shimmered with the scent of endings that weren't really endings. Maybe someday she would read these words. Maybe not, but either way, the rain would carry them. I turned off the light, leaving only the glow from the window, silver, shifting, alive. Outside, the final drops slid down the glass, meeting, merging, disappearing into one another. And in that quiet, I finally understood what she had meant from the very beginning. Love isn't something you hold. It's something that falls softly, endlessly, and teaches you again and again how to let it soak through. The night exhaled. The rain eased. And somewhere, beyond the sound of water and wind, I could almost hear her voice. Faint, smiling and free. Still raining, it seemed to say. Still us.